Have you ever wondered why the smartest students in school were often the quiet ones? The ones who didn't show off, didn't brag, but somehow always stood out. They didn't shout the loudest or sit in the front row waving their hands. But deep down, they carried something powerful, something different. That's because they weren't just bright students, they were chosen ones. And guess what? God doesn't choose people the world celebrates. He chooses those who are often ignored, misunderstood, or even made fun of. In this video, we're diving into a surprising truth. Why the brightest students were the chosen ones, not the narcissists God refused to use. And trust me, it's going to make you think differently about your past, your gifts, and your future. The people who always needed attention, who acted like they knew it all, the ones we now call narcissists, they looked confident. But God sees something deeper than the surface. He looks at the heart. And some of the smartest, most spiritual warriors were hidden in plain sight, in classrooms, quietly writing, dreaming, and thinking big. So, stay with me until the very end, because by the time we finish, you'll not only see your childhood differently, you'll see your calling more clearly. You're not watching this by mistake, you're here for a reason. Drop a comment if this speaks to your soul. Join the community, show some love, and don't forget to hit like. It helps more chosen ones like you find this message. Let's start this journey together and uncover the truth behind the brightest lights God chose to shine. In every classroom, there were always students who wanted to be seen. They raised their hands before the question was even finished, made loud jokes to impress others, and couldn't stop talking about their own achievements. These are what we call narcissists, people who need attention to feel important. They often looked confident, but their confidence was built on showing off and being praised. But the chosen ones were different. They didn't chase applause, they didn't need the spotlight. They were calm, steady, and focused. While others shouted for attention, the chosen ones let their actions speak. They didn't try to prove they were better than anyone. They just kept learning, growing, and doing what was right, even when no one was watching. And here's where it gets deep. True strength doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being humble. Humility means knowing your worth without needing to scream it. It means staying grounded even when you know you could outshine others. And that's what made chosen ones special. They had quiet confidence. They weren't trying to win every argument or show off their talents. They understood that real growth happens in silence and real success isn't always seen right away. While narcissists worked hard to look great, chosen ones worked hard to become great. And this is why God chooses the humble, because He knows they don't let pride get in the way of purpose. He knows they will listen, learn, and follow the path He sets for them. The chosen ones might not be noticed at first, but over time, their light becomes impossible to ignore. While others chased hype, the chosen ones chose humility. And God saw them, and He smiled, because He always honors the heart that stays low, so He can lift it high. Some students in school were happy just getting the right answers. They followed the rules, filled in the blanks, and gave the teacher what was expected. That was enough for them, passing the test, pleasing the system, and feeling smart because they got it right. But chosen ones were wired differently. They weren't satisfied with just any answer. They wanted the real answer, the deeper one. If something didn't make sense, they didn't stay quiet. They wanted to know why things worked the way they did. They didn't ask questions to get attention or praise. They asked questions because something inside them was searching for truth. Chosen ones often made people uncomfortable, not because they were rude, but because they didn't blindly accept what they were told. They looked deeper. If a rule felt unfair, they wondered who made it and why. If a history book left something out, they noticed. If a teacher gave a half explanation, they kept thinking about it long after the bell rang. Here's the powerful part. Chosen ones weren't just looking for school answers, they were building a foundation of wisdom. They were training their minds to see through lies, to find what's real in a world full of noise. They didn't need validation from the system. They weren't trying to look smart. They were trying to be wise. That's why God chooses them, because He needs people who question what the world accepts. He needs people who don't settle for the surface but dig for the truth. The chosen ones, even as students, were already showing signs of something bigger. They were thinkers, truth seekers, and challengers of anything fake. While others memorized and moved on, the chosen ones kept asking, "But what does this really mean?" And that hunger for truth? That's what set them apart. In every group, there's usually someone who stands out with charm. They crack jokes at the right time, speak with flair, and draw attention without even trying. These people often seem like they have it all together. They shine in the moment, impressing others with quick thinking and flashy words. But charm and wit aren't the same as wisdom. While narcissists often relied on their charisma to gain approval, chosen ones walked a different path. They weren't always the loudest, the funniest, or the most noticed, but they carried something far more powerful, divine wisdom. Wisdom doesn't shout for attention. It whispers in quiet moments, shows up in hard decisions, and speaks when it truly matters. Chosen ones were the kind of people who didn't just speak to be heard. When they did speak, it meant something. Their thoughts were deep, their words had weight, and their silence even carried meaning. Here's the deeper truth. Wit may impress a room, but wisdom can guide a generation. God isn't looking for show-offs. He's not impressed by those who can speak fast but think shallow. He chooses those who are still enough to listen, humble enough to learn, and wise enough to act at the right time. That's why He molds chosen ones, not because they seek attention, but because they carry understanding that goes beyond their years. Narcissists seek the spotlight. Chosen ones carry the light. Wit is for entertainment. Wisdom is for leadership. Wit fades when the room empties. Wisdom grows even in silence. That's what made the chosen ones different in school, and that's what makes them powerful now. God doesn't need charisma to move mountains. He needs hearts filled with wisdom and minds He can shape for a greater purpose. And that's exactly what the chosen ones carried all along. Even during childhood, the chosen ones often felt out of place. In school, while others were carefree, laughing loudly, and moving through life without much thought, these special souls carried something heavier. It wasn't something they could explain, not even to themselves. There was a sense of responsibility, a quiet weight in their spirit. They weren't like everyone else, and deep down they knew it. But instead of feeling proud, they often felt burdened. They would lie awake at night, wondering why they felt so much, thought so deeply, or saw things others didn't even notice. To teachers and classmates, they might have seemed too quiet, too serious, or even too sensitive. But that wasn't a weakness. It was an early sign of something holy. While others were busy trying to fit in, chosen ones were already carrying seeds of purpose in their heart. They didn't always know what that purpose was, but they could feel it pulling on them, whispering in moments of stillness, making them uncomfortable with things that seemed normal to everyone else. Sometimes this made them feel isolated. They didn't laugh at cruel jokes. They couldn't join in the gossip. Even if they tried to blend in, something always kept them apart, not because they were better, but because they were set apart. There's a difference. Being chosen by God isn't always about being seen. Sometimes it's about being hidden, trained, tested until the right time. Here's what most people missed: that weight they carried wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a divine signal. God was already marking them, shaping them, even when they were too young to understand. He allowed them to feel deeply so they could carry compassion. He allowed them to be misunderstood so they'd develop resilience. He allowed them to walk alone so they'd learn to hear His voice. While narcissists were chasing attention, the chosen ones were quietly wrestling with questions about life, faith, right and wrong. They noticed pain in others. They asked deeper questions. They carried emotional and spiritual weight that no one else around them seemed to feel. And that wasn't a curse, it was preparation. God doesn't throw purpose on people randomly. He prepares hearts early. the struggles, the isolation, the feeling of not belonging. It wasn't a mistake. It was training. A chosen one's pain is never wasted. From a young age, they were being molded into vessels that could carry more, feel more, and give more. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. So if you were that student who felt different, who couldn't explain the heaviness you carried while everyone else played, know this: it was never a flaw. It was the fingerprint of heaven. You weren't carrying a burden, you were carrying a calling, and God saw it all. Even when you didn't understand it, He was preparing you for something far greater than the classroom. You were chosen, and the weight you felt was the first sign. Growing up as a chosen one often meant walking through school feeling like no one truly understood you. You thought differently. You felt more deeply. You questioned things others didn't even notice. While classmates were laughing at surface-level jokes or breezing through small talk, your mind was somewhere else, trying to make sense of the bigger picture. You weren't trying to act deep. You were deep. It was just how your heart and mind were wired. But that depth came with a cost. Because when you see what others can't and feel what others won't, it makes you stand out, and not always in a good way. Other students, and sometimes even teachers, didn't know what to make of you. You might have been called too quiet, too serious, or too intense. You may have heard things like, "You think too much," or "Why can't you just be normal for once?" People weren't trying to be cruel, they just didn't understand. And that misunderstanding could be painful. Sometimes your deep insights were met with silence or awkward glances. Sometimes your thoughtful questions made the room uncomfortable. Instead of being praised for your wisdom, you were pushed aside, ignored, or even mocked. Not because you were wrong, but because your thoughts made people face things they weren't ready to deal with. Truth has a way of exposing shallow thinking, and not everyone wants to go that deep. What hurt even more was when teachers, those who were supposed to see your potential, missed it completely. Maybe they thought you were distracted, lazy, or not participating enough. But the truth was, your mind was far ahead, wrestling with questions too big for the classroom. You weren't trying to rebel, you were simply operating on a level that many couldn't recognize. Here's the powerful truth: being misunderstood is often a sign that you're ahead of your time. God wired chosen ones to be different, not to confuse them, but to prepare them. You weren't made to blend in because your destiny was never average. The very things that made others uncomfortable, your depth, your questions, your emotional and spiritual insight, were gifts. But in a world that celebrates noise, quick answers, and shallow thinking, your depth stood out like a mystery no one could solve. But God knew. He saw what others missed. And while people labeled you as too much, heaven called you ready. So if you were ever labeled too deep, smile. You were never too deep, you were just swimming in waters others were afraid to enter. In a world full of noise and distractions, it's easy to get lost in the hustle of wanting to be noticed, to climb to the top, or to gain praise and validation. Narcissists often thrived in this environment, faking their way to success. They were good at putting on a mask, charming others, saying the right things, and playing the game to get ahead. They knew how to manipulate situations, twist truths, and make themselves look better than they really were. It wasn't about who they truly were, it was about how they appeared. But chosen ones saw through that. While the narcissists were busy spinning stories and creating false images, the chosen ones were quietly observing, listening, and developing something far more powerful than any act or performance: discernment. They didn't need to impress anyone with words or shallow actions. Instead, they learned to read the underlying truth in situations: what was real, what was fake, and who was truly trustworthy. Discernment is more than just making smart decisions. It's an ability to see past the surface and into the heart of things. It's knowing when someone is being genuine or hiding something. It's feeling the difference between truth and deception without anyone needing to explain it. Chosen ones could sense when something wasn't right, even if no one else could. They could spot hidden motives, recognize lies that slipped past the ordinary observer, and see distractions for what they were, traps meant to steer them off course. While narcissists manipulated situations for their gain, chosen ones relied on their ability to listen to that inner voice, the one that told them when something felt off. They didn't get caught up in the noise of false promises or shallow praises. They didn't get distracted by empty success or empty words. Their focus was always on what was real, on what had substance. And this skill of discernment wasn't just about other people. It was about recognizing the tricks the world tried to play on them. The world will always offer distractions, shiny objects meant to pull attention away from purpose. But the chosen ones didn't get distracted. They had an inner compass that pointed them in the right direction, even when the world tried to pull them elsewhere. God gave them this gift because He knew they'd need it. In a world full of lies, manipulation, and noise, chosen ones were called to see the truth. They were called to cut through the deceit and stay grounded in what mattered. They didn't need to fake it. They didn't need to fake it. They didn't need to lie. Because their strength wasn't in pretending, it was in seeing, understanding, and staying true to their purpose. While narcissists fake their way to the top, chosen ones used discernment to rise with integrity, and that's why they'll never fall. In a world where success is often measured by trophies, followers, and applause, it's easy to get caught up in the chase for recognition. Narcissists are particularly good at seeking glory, always in the spotlight, collecting accolades, and living for the next round of validation. Their focus is on being seen, admired, and celebrated. Every achievement is a step toward greater fame, every compliment a fuel for their ego. But for the chosen ones, something deeper called them. They weren't interested in the trophies. They didn't measure their success by the number of people who followed or praised them. Their eyes were set on something more lasting, something far more significant: growth. Chosen ones didn't live for the momentary highs of applause. They didn't chase after the fleeting joy of being recognized. Instead, they were driven by the pursuit of their true calling, which was always about growth, spiritual, emotional, and intellectual. They sought to align with the purpose God had placed on their lives, even when no one was watching. Even when the world didn't notice, they kept moving forward, trusting the process, knowing that true fulfillment came not from being celebrated, but from becoming who they were meant to be. While others measured their worth by the number of followers they gained or the awards they collected, chosen ones understood that those things were temporary. The real prize was personal development, the steady, sometimes difficult process of becoming a better version of themselves. They knew that growth wasn't always glamorous. It wasn't about instant results or public recognition. Sometimes growth meant facing uncomfortable truths, embracing failure, or walking a lonely road. But they chose it because they knew it was leading them somewhere far more significant than a fleeting moment of fame. And that's where the difference lies. Narcissists chased the glory, but chosen ones were chasing alignment with their purpose. They understood that the glory was just a distraction, a shallow form of success that fades over time. What mattered most was the work they did behind the scenes, the personal growth that shaped them from the inside out, and the alignment with God's plan for their lives. Even when the world didn't clap, even when they weren't awarded for their efforts, chosen ones continued with conviction. They knew that their journey wasn't about approval from others, but about fulfilling their divine calling, no matter how long it took or how unseen it seemed at the time. In the end, growth isn't something you can measure with followers or trophies. It's something that transforms you, reshapes you, and aligns you with the greater purpose that God has set for you. The chosen ones understood this, and that's why their path was never about seeking glory. It was about seeking growth, even when no one clapped. In a world that constantly seeks attention and recognition, it's easy to get swept up in the desire for the spotlight. Narcissists are masters at making sure they're always the center of attention. They seek out the applause, the praise, and the admiration of others because for them, the stage is where they feel validated. Every moment of recognition boosts their ego and feeds their need to be seen and admired. But for the chosen ones, the path was never about public acclaim. It was about personal transformation, often happening in the quietest, most unseen spaces. While the narcissists craved attention and wanted to be noticed by the world, God was working with the chosen ones in silence. Their preparation wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't about making a big entrance or impressing others. Instead, God shaped them in private, away from the noise of society and the distractions of fame. The chosen ones spent their time in solitude, quietly working on their character, strengthening their faith and refining their skills. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't public, but it was powerful. In the silence, God was teaching them lessons that would last a lifetime. He wasn't concerned with how many followers they had or how many awards they could collect. He was concerned with who they were becoming on the inside. The chosen ones were being molded into vessels of strength, wisdom, and integrity. They learned to be patient, to trust in God's timing, and to understand that true worth comes from character, not popularity. While the world was busy chasing quick fame and recognition, the chosen ones were quietly building a foundation of inner strength. They faced trials, endured hardship, and dealt with struggles, all in private, often without anyone noticing. But each challenge was a stepping stone, each quiet moment of growth was a preparation for the greater purpose ahead. This period of silence wasn't punishment, it was divine preparation. God was preparing them for something bigger than fame, bigger than recognition. He was preparing them to handle responsibility, to lead with wisdom, and to fulfill a purpose that required strength of character rather than an ability to impress others. The silence allowed them to become who they were meant to be, without the distractions of the world pulling them off course. It's easy to get lost in the noise of society and think that success is about being seen and praised. But the chosen ones understood that true preparation happens in the quiet. God doesn't need noise to do his work. He needs willing hearts and quiet moments to shape them into the leaders they're meant to become. So while the narcissists were chasing the spotlight, the chosen ones were being prepared in the shadows, building the character and wisdom that would one day carry them to a purpose far greater than mere popularity. And when the time came for them to step into the light, they would shine brighter than anyone could have imagined, because they had been shaped in silence. In school, there were always students who memorized every line in the book. They could repeat answers word for word, score high marks, and impress teachers. But chosen ones were different. They didn't just study to pass exams or repeat what was written. They wanted to understand why something worked, how it connected to real life, and what it truly meant. While others focused only on the surface, chosen ones went deeper. They didn't just want the answer, they wanted the truth behind it. If they read a story in class, they didn't just remember the characters, they felt the emotions, the hidden messages, and the life lessons inside the story. If they studied science, they weren't just trying to pass, they wanted to know how it connected to the world, how it explained creation, how it reflected God's design. This is what made them different. While some students were like machines, copying and repeating, the chosen ones were like explorers, curious, thoughtful, and always asking deeper questions in their minds. Here's the hook. This kind of learning wasn't loud or showy. It didn't always get the highest grades. In fact, sometimes it made them look slow because they weren't rushing to answer. They were thinking, feeling, and connecting ideas in ways others couldn't. And that's what made them powerful. God doesn't use people who simply repeat what they're told. He uses people who understand, who think with their hearts as well as their minds. Chosen ones could take a simple idea and see a bigger picture. That's why even after school ended, they kept growing, their minds kept working. They remembered lessons not just for tests, but for life. They became the people others turned to for wisdom, not just information, because they didn't just memorize it, they understood deeply. And that's exactly who God chooses, those who seek meaning, not just memory. From a young age, chosen ones were deeply sensitive to the injustices around them. It wasn't just a casual annoyance, it was a weight they carried in their hearts. In class, they couldn't stand when their peers were unfairly treated. They noticed when the quiet student was overlooked, when the hard-working kid was ignored, or when the teacher's favoritism created an imbalance. It wasn't just about feeling sorry for others, it was about feeling a deep, unshakable disturbance in their spirit whenever they saw something unfair happening. That feeling wasn't a flaw or weakness, it was a divine signal of a calling to do something greater. While others might have turned a blind eye or shrugged it off, chosen ones couldn't ignore the injustice they witnessed. Whether it was the injustice of being overlooked for opportunities or the unfair treatment of others, it tugged at their hearts in a way they couldn't explain. The world seemed unfair, and that reality weighed on them. But here's where the deeper meaning comes in, that very sensitivity was not a burden, it was the seed of something powerful. Chosen ones were being prepared for a future of leadership, a calling that would require them to stand up for what was right and to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. It's easy to dismiss someone who's disturbed by injustice as just being overly sensitive, but for the chosen ones, that sensitivity was an early sign of the compassion and strength they would need to lead and uplift others in the future. In school, this often looked like standing up for classmates who were being bullied or speaking out when something didn't seem right. They felt it deeply when others suffered, even if they couldn't change the situation right away. It hurt them to see inequality, but it also sparked something in them, a drive to change the world around them. These moments in their youth weren't just about being upset. They were the foundation of a future where chosen ones would be equipped to lead, guide, and create a fairer world. Over time, that sensitivity grew into a stronger sense of justice, a powerful awareness that would eventually guide them toward their true calling. Where others might have become numb to the world's unfairness, chosen ones grew more determined to change it. Their ability to feel deeply in those moments was not a weakness, it was a gift. It meant that they had the heart to see the suffering of others and the courage to do something about it. God didn't let them feel the weight of injustice for no reason. He was preparing them for a life where they would have the power to lift up the oppressed, to fight for the underdog, and to make sure that no one else felt invisible or unheard. And so, while others might have dismissed their sensitivity, the chosen ones held on to it, knowing deep down that this was just the beginning of their journey to lead and to bring about the change the world so desperately needed. The chosen ones stood out not only for their academic brilliance, but also for something far deeper, an almost unexplainable spiritual sensitivity that guided them. They weren't just focused on their studies or striving for high grades. There was a quiet but powerful force within them, an inner voice that they trusted more than the opinions of others or the noise of the crowd. While their classmates might have been content to follow the popular trends or aim for the conventional definitions of success, chosen ones had a different way of seeing the world. They could sense the deeper layers of life, the feelings behind words, the unspoken truths in a conversation, and the energy in a room. They weren't just focused on academic success, they were focused on aligning their actions with something higher, something spiritual that anchored them in moments of uncertainty. This spiritual sensitivity was not always understood by those around them. In a world that often valued logic, reason, and measurable results, the chosen ones seemed to operate on a different frequency. They trusted their gut, their intuition, and the whispers of their spirit over what might seem like more rational decisions. Whether it was a choice in their personal lives, their academic pursuits, or relationships, they listened closely to what felt right on a deeper spiritual level. There was always a balance they maintained between their worldly pursuits and their spiritual journey. They were focused, no doubt, but their focus was never solely on the material world. They were driven by a greater sense of purpose. They studied hard, they worked hard, but at the same time, they sought alignment with their inner truths, trusting that their path wasn't just determined by the grades they received or the goals they achieved, but by how deeply they connected to something higher. In the classroom, chosen ones were often the ones who spoke with wisdom that went beyond their years. They weren't just regurgitating facts, they understood the meaning behind the lessons, often connecting them to life's bigger questions. In group settings, they might have quietly observed while others debated over superficial matters, but when they spoke, their words carried weight, not because of how loud they were, but because of the depth of understanding behind them. They saw the world not just with their eyes, but with their hearts and spirits. This spiritual sensitivity also made them incredibly empathetic. They could sense when something was off with a friend or classmate, picking up on emotions that weren't immediately obvious. It wasn't just that they were observant, they could feel what others were feeling, and that ability allowed them to connect on a deeper level. And this was what made them unique. They weren't just academically gifted, they were spiritually in tune. They didn't seek validation from others, nor did they follow the crowd. Instead, they trusted the whispers of their spirit, which guided them toward a deeper understanding of life's purpose. Their focus wasn't just on getting good grades or gaining recognition, it was on aligning with something greater than themselves, something divine. And this spiritual depth was the secret that allowed them to succeed in ways that went far beyond what was visible on the surface. In a world that often celebrates performance, where success is measured by how well we can present ourselves, chosen ones operate on a completely different level. While narcissists may excel at performing, they know how to put on a show, garner attention, and make an impression. God doesn't need performers. He needs vessels, hearts and minds that are willing to yield to His will, to be shaped and molded into tools for His divine purpose. This is the core difference between those who merely seek the spotlight and those who are truly chosen for greatness. Narcissists, driven by ego, can excel in the short term. They know how to manipulate situations, gain followers, and appear impressive to the world. Their success is built on self-promotion, on the external show they put on for others to admire. But God's work isn't about appearance or surface-level achievements. It's about transformation. It's about allowing His will to flow through you, to use your life as a vessel to accomplish something far greater than self-interest. The chosen ones understand that. They know that true power doesn't come from how loud you can speak, how bright you can shine, or how many people you can impress. It comes from being willing to be a vessel, an instrument in the hands of God. This doesn't mean being passive or inactive. On the contrary, the chosen ones are active participants in God's plan, but they do so in a way that surrenders their own ego to a higher calling. They allow God to guide them, shaping them through humility, service, and surrender. This is the essence of transformation. While performers seek to impress, chosen ones allow themselves to be transformed. They yield their will to God, trusting that His purpose will be greater than their own. And in doing so, they tap into a deeper power, one that isn't about accolades or praise, but about fulfilling the divine mission set before them. The narcissist may perform, but the chosen ones live in a way that transcends performance. They don't need to be the center of attention because they know that God works in the quiet moments, in the humbling experiences, and in the spaces where ego is set aside for divine purpose. The chosen ones understand that they are merely instruments through which God's work is done, and that is the true measure of greatness, not in how well we perform, but in how willing we are to be vessels of transformation, to allow God to use us to create something lasting, meaningful, and true. Failure was never the end for the chosen ones. While many see failure as a roadblock, a reason to quit, or a sign that something is fundamentally wrong, chosen ones saw it as a part of the journey. It was not something that defined them or their potential. It was simply a step in the process of becoming who they were meant to be. They took failure as fuel, not finality. This mindset made them different. While others might get discouraged after a setback or a mistake, chosen ones had a unique ability to recalibrate. Instead of crumbling under the weight of disappointment, they would analyze what went wrong, learn from the experience, and then come back stronger. They didn't fear failure, they embraced it as a teacher, knowing that every failure contained lessons that would propel them forward. It was this resilience, this unwavering belief that failure was not the end but a tool for growth that made them unstoppable. The world often tells us that failure is something to avoid, but the chosen ones understood that without failure there is no growth. They weren't afraid to take risks, to try new things, and yes, to fail along the way. Each failure only fueled their determination to keep going, to keep pushing forward until they reached their true potential. They didn't view failure as a reflection of their worth. It was simply a part of the process. And this made them relentless. Where others might have given up, chosen ones recalibrated. They adjusted their approach, refined their skills, and pushed forward with even greater purpose. Their failures didn't define them, they used them as stepping stones. They understood that God's plan was always bigger than any single moment of failure. They trusted that each setback was a part of a larger divine picture that would eventually lead them to success. In a world where so many are taught to avoid failure at all costs, the chosen ones flipped that narrative. They knew that failure wasn't something to fear, but a necessary part of growth. Failure didn't stop them, it fueled them. And it was this mindset, this understanding that failure was not final, that made them unstoppable on their journey. The chosen ones had a unique quality that set them apart from others: natural leadership. This wasn't the type of leadership that was forcefully demanded or flaunted. It wasn't about standing at the front, taking charge, or commanding attention. The leadership they embodied was effortless, rooted in their authenticity and inner strength. People followed them not because they tried to lead, but because their presence commanded respect and admiration. It wasn't about titles, accolades, or recognition. The chosen ones didn't seek the spotlight or the power to control others. Instead, their light shone so brightly that people were naturally drawn to them. Their words carried weight because they spoke from a place of truth and integrity. Their actions inspired trust because they were consistent and reliable, even when no one was watching. For the chosen ones, education was never just a means to an end. It was never about collecting grades, accolades, or impressing others with their intellectual prowess. In a world that often sees success as being defined by academic performance and public recognition, the chosen ones had a completely different perspective. To them, education was not about showing off, it was about service. From an early age, they understood that knowledge was a tool, a means to a greater end. It wasn't about proving how much they knew or demonstrating their intelligence to gain admiration from their peers. Instead, the chosen ones saw education as a way to prepare themselves to serve a higher purpose. They weren't concerned with just mastering textbooks or memorizing facts for the sake of passing exams. They wanted to truly understand the material, to know it in a way that would empower them to solve problems, heal wounds, and restore balance in the world. While others may have seen their studies as a way to earn rewards, the chosen ones had a deeper sense of responsibility. They approached education with the belief that true knowledge comes with a duty to use it for the greater good. For them, education wasn't something to boast about, it was a tool to help others, a way to bring healing where there was hurt and solutions where there were problems. They didn't study just to gain recognition or to excel in their fields. They studied because they believed that by gaining knowledge they could serve others in profound ways. Whether they were learning about science, history, mathematics, or literature, the chosen ones saw the bigger picture. They didn't simply learn to advance themselves, they learned to improve the world around them. They didn't approach their education with a competitive mindset, but rather with a mindset of service. This service-oriented approach to learning often made them different from their peers. While many of their classmates might have been focused on grades or impressing their teachers, the chosen ones remained focused on how they could use what they learned to make a meaningful impact. They knew that the knowledge they were acquiring wasn't for their personal gain. It was part of a larger purpose, one that transcended the classroom and reached into the world. They didn't need external validation for their accomplishments. The knowledge itself was their reward, and the thought of using it to serve others was their driving motivation. It wasn't just about textbooks or classroom lessons either. The chosen ones understood that education went beyond academic subjects. It was about life itself. They understood the importance of learning from every experience, every interaction, and every challenge. They sought wisdom not just from books, but from life, knowing that every opportunity was a chance to grow and deepen their understanding of the world. In a world where academic performance often dictates success, the chosen ones were set apart by something far more profound than grades, test scores, or report cards. While society might measure intelligence by GPAs, achievements, and accolades, God looks beyond the surface. He looks at the heart. For the chosen ones, their worth was never determined by how well they performed in school or the awards they collected along the way. What set them apart was their inner character, their purity, readiness, and faithfulness. God's selection is never based on human standards, and that's a powerful reminder for anyone striving to be the best version of themselves. The chosen ones weren't picked because they were the smartest in the class, nor because they had the highest grades. Their calling came not from their outward accomplishments, but from a heart that was pure and full of faith. It was their inner disposition that made them suitable for the work God had prepared for them. They had hearts that were open and willing to serve, hearts that trusted in a higher purpose, and hearts that remained humble despite their talents and abilities. While many people focus on earning praise through grades, the chosen ones understood that the ultimate recognition comes from God. Their hearts were aligned with His will, and they knew that true success is found in doing His work, not in worldly measures of achievement. They didn't need external validation or praise from others. Their hearts were content in knowing they were fulfilling a divine purpose, and that was far more valuable than any honor society or honor roll could offer. The hearts of the chosen ones were uniquely shaped by their experiences, values, and the love they had for others. It was this compassion, empathy, and sense of service that God recognized in them. He saw the goodness in their hearts, the willingness to use their gifts for His glory, to help those in need, and to lead with integrity and humility. While others may have sought recognition for their hard work, the chosen ones understood that true worth comes from the inside, from a heart